humans and the ocean go hand in hand. We've evolved from the sea.
A lot of what civilization tended to be in the 20th century was progress up the food chain. That, to me, is a kind of fundamental adjustment that we're going to need to make in the 21st century to understanding that a more advanced culture doesn't eat higher on the food chain, it eats lower on the food chain. It's hard to know what to eat, particularly when it comes to seafood. You don't know, is farm raised better than wild caught?
You know, we come up with these great solutions, or what we think are great solutions, but quite often we don't stop and really properly ask ourselves, is this the right answer?
A lot of people are really just interested in their own health and their family's health. And then you have a growing number of people who are interested in the health of the planet and the sustainability of what they're eating and the impacts of what they're eating beyond their own homes.
The general public, when you go out to your fish market or at the restaurant, they see the fillet. You know, they don't see the whole fish. They don't see where it's come from. They don't see what's gone into making that fish.
Sitting here in the Fertile Crescent, this is where food production, domestication of livestock began. And this is also where historically fishing in the sea was a fundamental part of the culture.
We're here in an exploratory mode, on a boat, in an exploratory vehicle, and we're here to see what there is.
This man with his 10 or 15 small tuna has been out fishing all night. You know, all the effort going in to catch these fish, and yet these fish are really undersized.
So we just approached this guy who's out here fishing for snapper in very deep water with hook and line. And he said in 1984, 85, back in the mid-80s, they were able to catch 1,000 pounds of fish a day here at this site, and now they're catching maybe 50 or 60 pounds a day.
Everybody says that in the last 50 years, fish stocks have been depleted by 90%. That is, we have 10% of what we used to have. But in the meantime, world population also has grown triple. We are a little bit also Genghis Khan's descendants. So we have the tendency to graze the grass to its roots where we go. We need food supplies, but whatever damage in 2 years is done, you can't repair it in 20.
A country surrounded on three sides with water is running out of fish to sell. All along the coast, fishing towns are turning into tourist towns. A way of life is disappearing.
What we have here in Turkey is a country that is transitioning very rapidly from a fishing operation to an aquaculture industry.
So how many people did you say worked here?
120 people.
120 people work here.
The most common approach to farming fish that normally live in the ocean is to raise the fish in their native waters, but contained inside of a large pen, suspended in the water.
So 240,000 fish?
In this way, these marine species experience water temperatures and chemistry similar to their wild cousins, only they are packed into cages at a much higher density, and they are fed fish food pellets instead of their natural, more varied diet. As with any kind of farming, before raising a crop of fish, you need a seed of some kind. When these eggs hatch, they become fingerlings, or juvenile fish. The fingerlings are raised batch by batch in tanks indoors, where the temperature and the lighting can be carefully controlled to optimize their growth and survival. When they are large enough, each batch of young fish is moved outside to pens in the ocean very near to shore, where they can be closely monitored and fed as often as necessary. After several months, the fish are moved again, this time further offshore where the water is colder and deeper. In a sea bass operation like this one, each pound of fish takes about 3 or 4 pounds of feed to produce. Almost every fish farmer in the world is focused on using the smallest possible amount of feed. This farm uses a partly automated feeding system.
Right now we're heading a little bit offshore to where some of the net pens are. We're going to hopefully see the automatic feeder. They have a large barge there that they use to feed the fish.
The feeding barge is loaded with feed each week and then towed offshore to the fish pens where it is anchored. Several times a day, pumps on board the barge push the feed pellets through large floating hoses into the top of each fish pen. Operators watch the cameras and reduce or increase the amount of feed according to the appetite of the fish.
You can see them on the surface and the feeder spinning on the top. To be able to watch the fish feed to make sure that you're not overfeeding helps to control costs.
A system like this one is expensive to maintain and operate, and not every fish farmer can afford one, but it does appear to reduce some of the waste. When ready, these fish will be harvested by simply pulling the net out of the sea and throwing the fish on ice, ready to be sold. Muhsin Demirkan was born in Turkey, but now lives in New York City, where he manages a popular Turkish restaurant.
When I came back for vacation to Turkey, I'd go to fish market. You would have a choice of wild fish or cultured. I'm like, oh, what is this now? Adın ne senin? Muzaffer. Muzaffer, okay. What my belief is, the fish, if it's wild, it's better. It tastes better and it's it's better for you. And if it's cultured, for some reason I feel like it's not gonna taste good. For me, everything organic is better. For that reason, I want to eat organic fish, which is wild fish, not cultured fish. So I'm torn right now. Should I not eat organic wild fish because there's less fish in the sea? Should I eat cultured fish? I don't know if it's good for me.
I think pinning everything on the consumer is unfair. I've always felt that way. As an engineer, I believe that those of us who are responsible for designing manufacturing and production processes, making goods and services and food, have a responsibility as much as a consumer does. It's not all about green choice in the marketplace. It's also about green choice in the investment community and in the farming community.
It's taking that whole concept of demand and taking some of it out of the hands or out of the responsibility of the consumer. Why did you get into fish farming?
He owned a restaurant before this. They couldn't find fish in Kash. The government came here and encouraged them to build fish farms. They gave even little money to do this, for them to open up like fish farms. In 2 months, they built whole thing. They built it themselves.
They build it themselves? Yes. How many fish do you have in each of your cages?
Total 120,000.
Why did they pick this spot?
The government did some tasting in the seawater. Government told them this is the best area. They don't know. He says, I had no idea. They're not happy that they've started it because they don't make any money.
So business is not good?
Business is not good.
And yet, if we went over to Kash, there are a lot of restaurants, there are a lot of hotels that are serving fish, but there's no way that these guys can sell their fish directly into that market.
I asked him, why don't you sell small amounts in the bazaar in Kash to people?
Yes.
He says, it's so small, I don't want to do this because I damage my fish when I pull the net up.
Yes.
When you go to a restaurant, if you order sea bass, cultured sea bass is 15, wild is 30,
Yes.
double the price.
So every year when they grow the fish, they're not sure who's going to buy them.
Yes.
They may not sell them at all that year.
Well, if they find a customer, they're going to sell. If not, they're just going to wait. And then last year, they sold 24 tons to a company in Izmir. They didn't even get their money back.
Wow. So you lost.
The company who bought the fish from them says, we're bankrupt. We don't have money to give you.
And where do you get your fingerlings from?
They bought it from a private company in Adana. But they used to bought it from government had
a government hatchery?
Hatchery, yes.
Has the government hatchery closed down?
The government's hatchery is still open, but government wants cash money.
So they're not giving you the fish anymore?
Now government is pushing them to close it down.
Because the tourism is more important now.
Political stuff, he says. Political, and then maybe tourism is better.
Aquaculture has only been around here for a couple of decades and it's grown very rapidly over the last 20 years.
And that's why Turkey is a really neat place to be right now, because there's such a range of fish farms here in this one small part of the world. We want to put together a picture of what sustainability means in Turkey now and how that could apply to the rest of the world.
Merhaba, hoş geldiniz. Welcome.
Thank you.
My name is Hüseyin Çakir.
I'm Andy.
The owner of the company. We are doing very serious and very important job because farmers are putting a lot of money, huge monies in the net cages that we are doing. We are selling the best knotless net from Italy. And we are selling plastic fish tubs from Iceland. We are selling anti-fouling material from United States, from New Jersey. We are selling marine lanterns for navigation from Australia. They are assembling the nets.
Have many of these people worked for you for a long time?
Most of them are working with us from the beginning. We started 23 years ago by supplying to fishermen only. And I know total catch values of fishing in Turkey this year.
From the sea, the wild stock.
Of course, wild side, it's maybe 40% less catching values we have. This is true for all world. Population is increasing.
Yep.
I think 40 years ago it was 2 billion, now 7 billion.
Yep.
Aquaculture is the only solution in my opinion. Turkey is surrounded by sea and very clean sea. Most tasty fishes, cultivated fishes, are from Turkey. Why? Because salinity and seawater temperature is very important for taste of structure of flesh. I believe that Turkey will be the main supplier of seafood for Europe.
The more I learn about food and the more I learn about sustainable production methods for food, the harder it gets to make choices for seafood.
As far as the eye can see that way, at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 bags deep, 2 bags high, so 20 bags per row, and by 100 rows.
Fish farming is very intensive. You have tens of thousands of fish in pens that are very close to each other, and all those fish are hungry all the time. They need to eat every day, which means we need to bring thousands upon thousands of pounds of fish food into these fish.
And this is the largest plant in Turkey?
Yes,
For feed production?
you can say yes. Largest fish feed factory.
Is that fish meal?
Soybean.
Soybean.
Soybean meal from USA. We use soybean meal, fish meal, corn gluten, wheat gluten. Sometimes we use canola meal.
The protein in a lot of this fish feed comes from fish meal, and the fish meal comes from South America. Well, you couldn't find a place on the planet that was much further away from Turkey. So in order to feed the fish in our fish farm, we need to fish for more fish out in the ocean.
How long from production to bag to out the door?
For 1 ton, we need 1 hour.
1 hour. 1 hour.
1 hour half.
This is the laboratory.
This is the quality control laboratory. I'm the chemist. I'm testing the formulations, I'm testing the pre-products and after the product production.
Quality control.
Yes, quality control. Also, I'm controlling the mycotoxins.
That's obviously very important because
Very important.
whatever the fish eat,
yes.
people eat.
If we wish to sustain aquaculture, we have to sustain the nature. If we wish to sustain nature, we need to sustain aquaculture.
The solution, which is aquaculture, relies on fish for feed.
There are some difficulties again. From where we can find fish meal? Fish meal is coming from sea.
We have to make sure that you use innovation to make sure that the solution isn't also causing more problems.
Unfortunately, we finished all the sources, all the fishes from the sea.
That's the bottleneck. That's what's going to really limit us.
Yes. If we can find some other protein sources like soya, but soya is not good for fish. It's not enough for fish.
The amount of power, electricity, fuel to catch the fish in Peru, then move that material here to Turkey. The process here to make the pellets is energy intensive, a lot of electricity, natural gas. We saw the large heaters that are used to remove the moisture, the large extrusion machine. then being sent to the coast to feed massive production of sea bass and sea bream. Not many people realize that this much matter and energy goes into producing one small fish.
Some of that food gets dumped into the pen and it isn't even eaten. It sinks out to the bottom of the pen.
It goes through the net. The nets, I mean the pens, okay? The pens have openings. The fish eats, let's say, 70, 80% of what goes through. But, I mean, some passes through without being eaten. So if there is not enough circulation, or the water is not deep enough, it goes and settles on the bottom. Then you have the fish excrements who go and settles on top of it. That can be the source of bacteria growth, of epidemics of some kind. You have also wildlife coming and grazing underneath the pens because it's a free meal. So it's a whole ecosystem which is being built there. So if you start having epidemics of some kind or diseases with this bacteria, it grows out in the wild.
The ocean's natural productivity is reaching some limits. We're going to need to farm fish to meet the demand for seafood. There are a lot of advantages to doing that, but it's important to make good choices about how we do that because there are a lot of potential pitfalls in farming fish.
Well, we had 80 cages with sea bass and sea bream, and this is a really interesting case study because those cages used to be in this bay, right? And you know, from the satellite image we saw from 3 years ago, this whole bay was an environmental hotspot. So the government has now imposed a regulation that these fish farms have to be a kilometer offshore.
I was talking to the guy there that was running the fish farm operation. When we came up, they were changing the nets in the pen. I asked him if the fish grew faster or slower offshore than they did onshore in their old location.
For fish, it's better.
Why do you think that is? In terms of just water or?
It's about water quality. In this region, the water is clear.
Surprised me that the fish actually are growing better out there.
They're growing faster.
They're growing faster
offshore than they were inshore.
Yep,
So
yep.
because the water is a little cleaner or
there's more water flow.
Moving through the cages better.
That means less food, potentially, in terms of growth rates. Better feed conversion.
Right, and a more efficient use of your invested capital in nets and pens.
Yep.
When we try to measure the sustainability of a fish farm, I think about how much energy does it take to run this farm? How much pollution does this farm create? One good-sized fish farm can produce the same amount of waste as a small town. And how much destruction of marine resources is involved in producing the food for the fish in the farm.
Tuna ranching is the process of catching fish from the wild, placing them in pens, and then fattening them up in captivity before harvesting. The process of tuna ranching allows Turkey to get more fish meat out of the wild stock than they would otherwise be allowed under current quotas. The tuna ranching companies find the school of wild tuna, and they encircle that school with nets that are almost a mile long. They transfer the tuna from the big nets into the round pens. Then they tow the entire pen north to this bay near Izmir.
This is amazing. Look at the size of those fish.
The fish add about 50% to their body weight during the ranching. They grow very fast because they are fed a great deal. They'll stay in these pens about 3 to 5 months, and then they'll be harvested. The tuna fatten better in the colder water up here near Izmir, and they develop the fat that is so highly prized in Japan. However, the practice of tuna ranching creates other problems.
Another big issue talking about spawning is that the season that the governments allow the fleets to fish the tuna. In full spawning season, when they haven't yet laid their eggs. Now, if you ask the fisherman, why do you do it like that? He says, because it's the easiest to catch, and that's sad.
Ben size veririm. Ben çıkıp ay tamam ben gireyim hocam. Ne diyordum? Girmeyeceğim. Atlamak istiyorum.
Tuna don't start spawning until the age of 3, and then they will spawn for about a decade. So if we take them when they're too young, before they've even had a chance to reproduce once, then we're making it very difficult for the natural population to survive.
If it spawns in captivity, in a pen, those eggs are gone. The problem still here is not what is done, it is the extent at which it is done, because you have quotas.
Yeah.
Every country member of FAO, United Nations, or ICCAT has quotas.
Right.
Every county breaks those quotas. Italy goes above by 30%, 40%. Spain breaks it by 30, 40%. France breaks it by 20%.
In Turkey, we see how technology is associated with bigger, better, faster. Nothing that we look at in Turkey is particularly high tech, but certainly the tuna industry is the most high tech. It's at the tuna ranch where we see the most modern pens, we see the largest boats, and it's certainly the most techno-intensive of the culture methods that we see in a traditional sense.
The divers go into the pens with these bang sticks. Bang sticks are a shotgun shell on the end of a 4-foot metal rod. They use the bang stick to physically contact the head of the tuna, and the shell explodes, and that's the initial blow. The fish start coming up pretty steadily now. They take the big ones first, then we get into the small ones, and they just come one after another, and it becomes a production line. They seem to kill these fish about 5 times. First they shoot them in the head, Then they stab them in the heart twice because they flip the fish over, do it from both sides. Then they brain them with a spike, and then they take that rod and push it down their spine.
But they have to be killed very quickly and bled out because that helps preserve the quality of the meat.
It's a serious business. It's quite precise. You don't see a lot of waste in terms of manpower or in terms of fish. But the problem is that the tuna's not going to make it. We're catching too much. We have too much technology. We have too many advantages on our side. This is a type of aquaculture that you really can't fix by changing the way they do it. This is a type of aquaculture that you can only fix by reducing the demand for this fish.
I used to love eating tuna. Ever since I actually saw that occur and really start to put it into the bigger picture, I haven't eaten tuna since. Would I like to? Sure. But I've made a conscious decision not to.
I will tell you another story is when I started releasing tuna about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 10. People were looking at me and saying, "What? You're nuts or what? Releasing tuna?"
Even if we stop fishing our wild stocks, like right now, everything, it will take a long time for those systems to recover.
When last bird flies up, when last fish goes away, it is too late.
I think that nature has not only a critical value, but also certain kind of rights. There's a speciesism to just worrying about us and what the carrying capacity will be for us.
Water is the blood. It's feeding our planet. It's feeding the fish. It's feeding the trees. It's feeding the atmosphere. It's sustaining us. Understanding how humans interface with fish and interface with the water allows us to better understand why fish stocks in many parts of the world are declining, why water quality in many parts of the oceans and lakes and streams are declining. Our dependency is so high on this precious resource.
So the ideal fish farm would use a minimal amount of energy, cause a minimal amount of pollution, and involve growing fish that are as low on the food chain as possible.
When a fish farm is located inland, it faces a different set of challenges than farms set in the ocean. For example, water is often in limited supply.
One innovative sea bass and sea bream farm that we did see, though, was operated by somebody that was growing sea bass and sea bream in offshore cages. And rather than trying to make enough money or raise enough capital to move their cages offshore, they then found a saltwater spring inland and dug some ponds and are growing sea bass and sea bream 5 or 6 miles or 10 miles from the coast.
It's interesting to see this connection with the ocean here in the middle of olive trees and cornfields. This operation wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the fact that there's a saltwater spring right over there coming out of the rocks, feeding all these ponds. You've been here for 5 years at this location. Is this a higher quality fish? Is the meat better? Is it? What he's found over time, over the last 5 years, is that this steady supply of saline water is actually producing a better product. So he actually gets more money per pound from these ponds than he did from the ocean. 500 grams? 800 grams? Almost 9.
The color, very
Oh,
different.
it's beautiful.
Like natural.
Yeah, because the ones that we saw at Yildiz were dark.
Yeah.
Beautiful sea bream, natural color, pink and yellow. Rawr, rawr.
Oh yeah, you can definitely taste the salt.
It's a little fishy too. This is great. I think this is the most important part of all your operation is the fact that you have salt water. There's no pumping, you don't have to pay for electricity. This helps keep your costs down. Economically, it makes sense. And I think environmentally it makes sense because he's able to feed more efficiently. There's not as much waste. It's a very interesting example of capitalizing on certain features of the landscape. Very nice operation. Oh, no. Thank you for letting us see your farm. You were also saying that a lot of the lakes, that there's still more potential.
Huge capacity.
Perhaps different species.
Especially the east and southeast part of Turkey. Many artificial lakes, dam lakes for trout and some other freshwater species. Trout, very common and well-known fish in Europe. European companies also, they are buying and processing the fishes here in Turkey, then making smoked, marinated fillets and sending to Europe.
Trout farming is as different from sea bass farming as growing coffee is from growing corn. Trout are a freshwater species, preferring the cold, clean water of mountain streams. This fish farm is in the heart of a nature park, many kilometers from the nearest town. No water pipes reach this valley. Instead, a natural spring gushes from the mountainside.
These two together are 700 liters per second. Yeah. So that's like a little creek, a good-sized creek running down a mountain.
The water is a constant temperature all year round and the flow is steady. It's good water for trout, perhaps even great water, but there is only so much of it. These are conditions that encourage efficiency and creative design. As this water tumbles down toward the valley below, the fish farmer uses it as many times as possible. Then it drains away on its journey toward the sea. Before it gets there, this water will be used to irrigate crops in the fields, and villagers downstream may even use it for drinking. So it needs to stay clean. Once the water reaches the bottom of this slope, it is filtered in a natural pond. There are 4 stages to this farm. Every stage uses the water from the stage above it and passes water to the stage below it. Gravity does the work. At the top, where the water is most pure, it is filtered through sand, then it passes into the hatchery.
So these are fertilized rainbow trout eggs. You can see the eyes starting to develop as the yolk starts to get absorbed.
The water from the hatchery drains downhill into the fingerling pens.
These are rainbow trout, little tiny guys, maybe about 10 or 15 grams.
The fish are a little bigger here, but they're still kept under cover for protection from the sun. From there, the water drains through the broodstock sheds. Broodstock are fish that have been selected for their size and their health to lay and fertilize eggs for the entire farm. Finally, the water flows into the grow-out pens, where the larger fish live and grow until they are harvested for the market. This is the bottom end of the farm. If we look at the materials flowing through this farm, the water makes a short journey, and the trout are born and die in the same place. But the issue of feed remains. In the wild, trout are omnivorous predators, eating insects, smaller fish, fish eggs, crayfish, and anything else they can find.
Oh, look at that.
Beautiful. Bon appetit.
Thank you.
The trout are delicious, and the water management on the farm is elegant and efficient. But their food comes from far away, and the trout themselves have a long way to go from here to whatever dinner plate they are destined for.
$3.2 lira per liter of regular gasoline So that's about 12 lira per gallon, which is about $8 a gallon. So it makes anything that involves fuel very expensive in this part of the world. That includes running the boats for a fish farm, running the trucks to bring the food to the fish farm, and running the trucks to bring the fish back to the market after they've been farmed. So a lot of these fish will be put on a truck and driven all the way to Europe. Carbon dioxide emissions all along the way. Global warming impact all along the way.
But there are ways to minimize the expenditure of energy, and one of the best ways to do this is to reduce the distance that the fish feed must travel before it gets to the fish farm, and also reduce the distance that the fish travel between the farm and the consumer. We visited a seafood restaurant that grew their own fish right across the road.
So what do you think this is, like 50 yards?
Yeah, it's about 50 yards. Pretty cool. Fish farm on one side of the street, restaurant on the other. It's terrific. I mean, this is where the demand is, right here in the restaurant. There's some other great things about local food production, too. You have control over the food chain. These guys see what they're buying. The customer sees what they're buying. You know what it is, you know where it came from, and you know what it's been eating, and you know what hasn't been done to it.
Right.
So the guy who runs a restaurant has control over all these things with a short food chain, which he wouldn't have with a long food chain.
And the fish are fresh.
So it's that maximum output for minimum input that drives you towards sustainability. And I'm looking for operations that manifest that quality.
That's the spring water. And being pumped by the windmill.
Yes.
No power bill.
Yes.
Yeah. This fish feeds a lot lower on the food chain, but the impacts that we're seeing here are quite minimal in comparison to potentially what we see with tuna and sea bream. The feed conversion ratio of these carp is a lot lower than a lot of the carnivorous fish that we see. This farm produces enough eggs and larvae to essentially distribute them throughout Turkey, which is amazing. Turkey's a big country, and carp is really one of the earliest fishes that were cultured in this country, so there's a lot of historical significance. Can I hold some fish? Usually this is a little bit more difficult with fish, but let's see what we get. Come on. Oh. So here we have a nice specimen of a common carp. This is probably about a pound. You can tell by its morphology, it's got this big vacuum-like mouth. It's a bottom feeder, very low on the food chain, so it doesn't eat other fish, and it's very productive in terms of its growth rates. It only takes 3 kilograms of feed to create a 2-kilogram carp. They also taste really nice. They're really good tasting fish, and I think if more people understood that eating lower on the food chain is a lot less energy intensive, it's a lot better on the environment, it's a lot better for nature, I think that they would be a little bit more conscientious and not be afraid to try eating carp. He put a special liner on the bottom of his carp farm, and he felt that it helped the carp not taste muddy. It had a positive influence on the flavor of the fish. He was using some of the fish waste to grow vegetables. The water was flowing downhill and fertilizing farms. You know, he was closing waste streams, and he's been doing this for 15 years. I think there's a bright future for aquaculture. We're really good at engineering things and making things and devising systems that might allow us to still produce the amount of fish that we need in order to sustain humans and also not be so hard on the environment.
And I think it's hard to talk about the importance of sustainable seafood without talking about the differences between fish and other forms of food, because the pressure on the oceans is being driven by demand for food. It's not just demand for seafood. it's very important to think about how the oceans produce food compared to how the land produces food and what some of our options are. The premier protein source in the world is beef. Using a lot of land to a lot of water pollution to methane emissions from cows, to everything down the food chain, all the energy and resources it takes.
When I think about a cow or cattle production, the range of cows, the types of cows and the type of production systems is kind of narrow.
Well, from an ecologist standpoint, almost any form of fish, whether it's wild caught, whether it's farmed, no matter what species it is, it's almost always going to be better than cows in terms of its footprint.
But the range of fish production systems and the types of fish that we harvest in the wild and the types of fish that we use for aquaculture is like this. It's a much broader scope.
The average person walking up to this tuna farm or walking up to the carp farm is going to say, well, the tuna operation certainly seems the most technologically advanced. Now, none of them seem like rocket science, but the tuna operation seemed like that's more advanced. And we need to think about that paradigm. What really is technical sophistication?
And it's changing the model of really what we are working towards in terms of the ideal fish farm.
In terms of feeding the growing population on the planet, fish has a really important role to play because it has the potential to be an efficient food source. Sometimes the more sustainable fish is the cheaper fish. Because one of the big issues, for example, is feed. If you can reduce the amount of fish feed required in the operation, you've reduced the ecological impact and you've obviously reduced the cost.
Are we eating farmed fish this evening or wild fish?
We're having some catfish. We're having some pompano that Andy thinks would be a good candidate for aquaculture. We're having some mussels that are already farmed or wild. The ones we're having are farmed from Canada. And we're having some grouper, and it's Spot the Unsustainable Fish Night. Okay?
How much, healthy wild fish is there even left?
Right, that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, at some point there's not going to be this choice. Perhaps the most important thing to understand about fish farming is that it's inevitable. As more and more people turn to seafood as a healthy protein source, and fish in the ocean become harder and harder to find, aquaculture has stepped in to fill the gap. Fish are being farmed all over the place, from the deep ocean to the mountaintops, and everywhere in between. What we learned in Turkey was that farming fish is no longer a question of if, it's a question of how. And it's not a question of should I buy farmed fish, but which of these farmed fish should I buy? The least sustainable aquaculture system that we saw was also the newest system. An endangered species, a disruptive fishing method, and an unsustainable feeding rate. The most sustainable farm that we saw was also the oldest system. An abundant species, an ancient technique, and an efficient source of fish meat. How do we explain these differences? Perhaps the greater ecological harmony that we observed at the inland fish farms has something to do with the long history of growing fish this way. The methods that have survived for so many centuries are almost sustainable by definition. By contrast, farming fish in the sea is still a much younger and cruder art, and we have many challenges still to overcome.
There's a carp carp in the tub, there's a carp in the tub, there's a carp in the tub, and everybody's dirty. There's a carp in the tub, there's a carp in the tub, so nobody's taking a bath. There's a carp in the tub, there's a carp in the tub, there's a carp in the tub, and everybody's dirty. There's a carp in the tub, there's a carp in the tub, so nobody's taking a bath. Mondays we eat vegetables, Tuesdays we eat meat, Wednesdays we eat chicken soup, it really can't be beat. Thursdays are for leftovers, that's Daddy's favorite dish. Friday nights we bathe after eating all our fish. There's a carp in the tub, there's a carp in the tub, there's a carp in the tub, and everybody's dirty. There's a carp in the tub, there's a carp in the tub, so nobody's taking a bath. There's a carp in the tub, there's a carp in the tub, there's a carp in the tub, and everybody's dirty. There's a carp in the tub, there's a carp in the tub, so nobody's taking a bath. On Thursday night, we ate SpaghettiOs. Carp, 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 carp. We rubbed tomato sauce all up and down our clothes. Carp, 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 carp. When Mom got mad, we all just sat and laughed. Carp, 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 carp. 'Cause on Thursday nights, nobody takes a bath. Carp, 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 carp. 'Cause there's a carp in the tub, there's a carp in the tub, there's a carp in the tub, and everybody's dirty.
Shit, we just ran out of gas. Wait, shit. Oh, come over here.
If you ever meet a carp and you take him to your house, make sure that he's really, really clean.